Good afternoon. Thank you for viewing today's webinar, Micro-Misbehaviors, Macro Consequences, Setting the Tone for Student Conduct. This presentation was one of our favorites from the 2025 annual conference. My name is Dr. Hilda Billups, and I currently serve as the Director of the Webinars Committee for TCUSPA. Allow me to introduce our presenter for today's webinar. Dr. Branston G. Harris is a proud native of San Antonio, Texas. Branston is a transformational leader, passionate about higher education. He loves to challenge and inspire students to achieve greatness within themselves. His experience and skills enable him to provide the most conducive environment and support services for students to holistically develop. Branston has 15 years of higher education experience in housing and residence life, behavior intervention teams, threat assessment, student conduct, new student orientation, counseling services, health services, student leadership, student retention, first-year experience, and first-generation students. Branston received his bachelor's degree from Texas State University with a BA in music and a minor in business administration. He received his master's degree in higher education, administration, and supervision from the University of Houston. He received his EDD in educational administration and foundations at Texas Southern University. Branston currently serves as the Assistant Dean of Students at the University of Houston downtown. We are very thankful and excited to have Dr. Harris with us today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Billups. I'm honored that people enjoyed my presentation enough for this to even be a thing, to be showcased on the TCUSPA Webinar Wednesday. I'm grateful for that opportunity. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into my presentation. And if you could let me know if you see it clearly. Awesome. So I'll go ahead and begin. So, as Dr. Billups said, micro misbehaviors, macro consequences, setting the tone for student conduct. And so this kind of came about through my experiences in student conduct, housing, and just everything that we see, where there may be opportunities to address misbehavior in those small, repeated, annoying type capacities that we sometimes run into in the different aspects of our job in dealing with students in higher ed. And so I presented this conference I presented this at the TCUSPA conference, so I'm excited to get started. So a little bit about me. Um, I'm currently at the University of Houston downtown. I serve as the assistant dean of students, and I've been here for 5 years. My work experience specific to this material have a lot of experience in student conduct, dealing with first generation students, residence life, student complaints, care and bit teams, and then policy development and enforcement. As Dr. Billups mentioned, I've gotten my Bachelor of Arts in Music at Texas State, my MED in administration supervision from the University of Houston. And then most recently, I've gotten my EDD in educational admin and foundations from Texas Southern University, just graduated in December. So glad to have completed that journey and dissertation. And so I'm ready to do whatever is next in that endeavor. So the next piece that I have is the learning objectives. For this presentation, we're going to define what micro misbehaviors are and kind of analyze their impact, explore some of the behavioral and educational theories that are associated with micro misbehavior, as well as reviewing what the best practices and addressing micro misbehaviors. And when I get into addressing, that is what we are currently doing at the institution where I'm at, while incorporating some of the different pieces from other institutions that have worked. And then lastly, discussing the gaps and the lessons learned as a part of dealing with micro misbehaviors in the higher education settings. And so why are we focusing on micro misbehaviors? And I have 4 reasons that I think really couch why it's important to focus on micro misbehaviors. The first of which is it provides us as administrators the opportunity to have early indicators of concern for different students that may lead into student conduct issues, disruption issues, all those different things, but also the areas that we can support these students. Secondly, it demands consistent responses to the different behaviors that we see. We all know that sometimes we operate in silos, sometimes information is not always as broadly shared as it could and should be. And so I think when we look at specifically micro misbehaviors, um, we have to have consistent responses and be able to be in those spaces and places, instructing faculty and staff, making it widely known for students to see what's happening, what's going on. Third, examining the relevance of institutional policy and procedure and processes. I think this is important. Um, while a lot of institutions may have policy, establishing those procedures and processes and those different protocols that help to identify any of those gaps, any of the gray areas, I think is really important. And then lastly, as far as why it's important, is it reinforces those community guidelines and student success from a holistic support um, perspective. We all understand as a part of the experience, the student experience, how you are when you first come into the doors at orientation and when you leave for graduation, you may be a totally different person. And so we have to have those guidelines that are in place and those support systems in place for students to be able to grow and develop as they get through their academic experience. So you cannot talk about micro misbehaviors without getting into some of the negative impacts that they have on an institution, on a classroom, and just a learning environment overall. I think the first negative impact is when it is not addressed, either whether that be consistently or at all, that begins to normalize and empower the non-desired behavior within those students. If I can get away with it in this class, right, what is to stop me from getting away with it in the next class, right? When we don't address those negative impacts, especially with those micro misbehaviors that start out small and they can escalate to bigger things, we see that those behaviors tend to escalate to where you have a definitive policy violation, right? That can be facilitated through the conduct process, or it will spread from one class to the next, from one year to the next, one semester to the next. Three, it becomes a resource drain, especially in areas where departments are understaffed, right? Being able to spend that physical time in having communications, having meetings, reaching out to the appropriate people involved, whether that be students, faculty, and staff, it can become a resource drain if these situations are not handled appropriately and consistently. And then lastly, it has the potential to stifle a learning environment, especially when we think about we want our students to be able to safely live and learn as a part of being on our campuses. Any impact to that learning environment really creates a problem and something that we would need to come in and address pretty directly. So what is a micro misbehavior? For the purposes of this presentation, I wanted to lay out a very far-reaching and centered definition for how I'm defining micro misbehavior, and that is a consistent or infrequent low-level, disruptive, incivil, or non-compliant action that may violate institutional policy, behavior expectations, or campus norms, but it does not constitute major university conduct violations in a disciplinary probation or a suspension or an expulsion. That's a major university violation. And so these are those smaller misbehaviors that, if you can think of it as like a rock in your shoe, it's those things that are smallly annoying but can cultivate over time different problems and bigger issues. So some examples of micro misbehavior, and this is not a exhaustive list of different behaviors. This is just kind of a big rocks of behavior that we consistently see within higher education and between my experience. So the subtle and blatant disrespect, and that can come directly in a one-on-one setting, whether that be at a particular department, in the classroom, And they do that in a multitude of ways. Um, Spending the night on campus or living on campus and in spaces where students know that they should not be living as a part of their circumstance or whatever may be behind that. Multiple reports across campus in a short span of time. I think when we are able to train faculty and staff and students to report behaviors that are concerning, behaviors that are threatening, I think that's helpful when people are empowered to do these different things. I think that reporting goes up and you're able to track, right, a student and situations that they are having to be able to cut that off, and as quickly as possible. Chronic lateness, I think that kind of speaks for itself. Excessive non-threatening emails and or complaints. I think it's one thing for a student to be anxious about how they're doing in a class or what type of services that they need to get, right? And being able to send one or two emails in a short amount of time. But I think sending a bulk 12, 15, 20 emails to one particular person or one department with similar information or across multiple different things, I think that begins to get into a micro misbehavior. Boundary pushing, and what I found that kind of looks like in the classroom at the departmental level, it's being able to speak to, well, the syllabus doesn't say that I can't, or this policy doesn't speak specifically to this particular thing, right? And so that boundary pushing, wanting to better understand how that works. You have the dismissive or selective adherence to feedback that can come from an email that you've sent to a student, feedback on a grade, right? Any of those different things, dismissive or selective in what they are able to process, what they will respond to, and those different types of things. Failure to comply on a general level, right? Whether that's verbal, in an email, or whatever, and then high functioning mental health and distress. We all know that when students are facing different situations, some of that energy, anxiety, right, fear will manifest itself as far as behavior, and sometimes that translates inside the learning environment in the higher education institutions. So I do have two theoretical frameworks for this presentation. It's behavioral and educational. So the behavioral theoretical framework is Skinner's operant conditioning. And to summarize that very quickly, it's behaviors can be understood as they are shaped by reinforcement or a lack of consequences, or how they are influenced by the consequences that are in place. And so that kind of speaks to how I mentioned earlier why it's important to address these different behaviors, right? We know that as students matriculate through their experience, how we respond to their challenges, respond to different situations that may occur inside the classroom and in the learning environment overall, that impacts and influences how students will respond in a similar instance. Now, the educational theoretical framework, I have two that I wanted to reference as foundational to this particular presentation, and that is Chickering's theory of student development, right, or the seven vectors. And I want to touch on specifically for that theory, it's the developing competence and how students are able to be autonomous and mature in the different relationships and how they get guidance as they grow in those processes, right? And some of that can come from the punitive responses that happen immediately inside of the classroom or through the student conduct office or whatever office or department is handling an issue. And then you have Piaget and Vygotsky's constructionist learning theory, which is essentially students build understanding through social interaction and experience, and they're able to internalize those norms through the reflection and structure support. And so that typically manifests itself. We see that largely in our student organizations. We see that inside of the classroom, right? Group me messages, right? And all these different things where that interaction consistently with other students, with faculty and staff can be impacted in how we normalize different behaviors within the community context and how those pieces kind of fall together. So best practices for addressing micro misbehaviors, and this is a combination of different best practices and guidelines from NBITA, which is the National Association for Behavior Intervention and Threat Assessment, and ASCA, which is the Association for Student Conduct Administration. And so those best practices include knowing and understanding what the different policies are that are associated with how you are able to define misbehavior, how you're able to enforce misbehavior, right? And then kind of better understanding how each person in the community, whether it be faculty or staff, um, how they're able to address those different situations. And sometimes it's outside of the student code of conduct. Are you establishing disruption protocols, as my second point mentions out? And what are those policies and procedures that kind of are direct reflections of how we address these different types of behaviors? I know a lot of times when it comes to protocols and policy, we will have a large policy that will handle a lot of the big rocks, but some of these gray areas, what are we doing to empower our faculty and staff to address these situations as they come up outside of just reporting? What tools are we giving them? The next bullet point, clear communication with the students. We have to make it known very clearly if we're having a one-on-one conversation in person, if we're on Zoom, if you're sending an email, that communication has to be clear. And the behavior expectations have to be known to the student so that you can then go back if there are other issues. Was the expectation of your behavior moving forward clear and laid out in a way that you understand? And so you have to utilize the reporting forms, whatever your campus has. If you need to have a reporting structure, how do you create that? If you have it in place, where are people able to find it? Is it easily completed? Right? You don't want to get form fatigue or any of these different types of things, but utilizing those forms, making it readily and accessible to all of your campus community, referring to student conduct for repeated or escalating behavior. When you step from a micro misbehavior into a student conduct and violation of university policy, knowing when to report, how to report, and all the different components that may come as a result of that. Sometimes you may be able to take interim measures, whether that be adjusting course modality. That could also be shifting a student from one class to another class, right? No contact orders, all the different interim measures that student discipline officers may take or different departments may be able to take as a result of these micro misbehaviors. And then lastly, being able to continuously monitor the behavior to be able to see what patterns are existing, what areas do we need to support for this student, right? Are they experiencing something at home that's caused them to act out? Or is something happened to them personally that's causing them to act out, right? Being able to understand the avenue in their mental health, and even some instances, their intellectual abilities as facilitated through having a educational plan, right? Through an accessible education center or whatever you may have. Being able to understand the issue and what's going on comprehensively may be able to help you in addressing the micro misbehavior. And so I broke up addressing the micro misbehaviors into two different slides. So the first of which is, I think that we do a really good job here at my campus of empowering faculty and staff to be able to respond, right? Giving them tools, right? Resource guides, how they should respond in the different particular situations that they may come across, right? Knowing how to report, what that looks like. And so we are in department chair meetings, right? We have it available where people can request us to come and talk to their classes, to departments overall, right? We are in all of our campus committee members' faces, knowing what we do, right? How to address these different behaviors so that they have the tools to be able to respond to these different situations, knowing when I'm reporting this is a micro misbehavior that needs to be documented, all the way to I need to escalate this to the dean of students office when this particular thing happens. And so we are very good at trying to advocate for our faculty and staff knowing how to respond. We want to empower them to do so. reporting of behavior, right? So a formal report comes in going, our campus utilizes Maxine. And so we have a form specific for care and incident reports for violations of student conduct. Any form that you send to through our reporting structure will come to the Dean of Students office, and we will triage as to the specific personnel departments where it needs to go. But that's our formal process. Informal, we still want our campus community to report those violations. Informally can also come from an email, right? An FYI, if you will. We want as much information as we can. We turn informal reports into Maxing reports that we are then able to track. Sometimes it is a one and done situation, right? Where we're able to have a conversation, an educational conversation with the student, expectations are set, and we don't hear from that student in that course or in their academic experience again. Other times it needs to be reinforced, right? And we can get into those different aspects as we go through. You have to establish and review your relevant policies, bylaws, contracts, and handbooks that you have on your campus. If you're dealing with student organizations, how up to date are their bylaws, their constitutions, right? If you're dealing with misbehavior as it pertains to third-party individuals and different stuff like that, what are those contracts? Handbooks, I think, are very important. Having a student handbook on your particular campus that lays out micro misbehaviors and the ways that they can manifest and disrupt, I think is really good. But also having the ability to have conversations across the campus. If this particular college has a handbook, how are they adding components for dealing with misbehavior from a general level and from a micro level, right? We have a lot of policies that touch on a combination of different things, and I think it's very important for institutions to continuously review policies, add different components as it's necessary. And then, so after you've done all these different things, right, we've empowered these different people, they've reported the behavior, right? We know what appropriate policy, bylaws, and contracts are associated. As this situation escalates, we want to consult with the leadership of that particular academic college or the supervisor, or leader of the department, or the dean of students and the care team, where it's relevant as how we are best going to triage the situation. And so I realized in doing this work that a lot of times we are not a formulaic administrator of punitive solutions. And what I mean by that is everything is not cookie cutter. We address each situation differently, separate from itself and other situations, and we look at it comprehensively, right? And so when I say comprehensive, I mean allowing space for advocacy, right? Having conversations across departments. Okay, if a student is exhibiting this behavior in this class, what is a way that we can kind of communicate with other faculty members that they may be having, right? With respect to FERPA and all those different things. And so, and I'll address that later, but how are we allowing for advocacy and better understanding what situations are happening external to the situation that we're dealing with to then address the situation that we're dealing with? And so on both of my slides for addressing micro misbehaviors, I have the documentation is essential. As much as you can document, keep those records, report so that there is a paper trail of what is happening actively, right? I've been in situations where we have had multiple reports for a student in a 6-hour span, right? And it's thanks to advocacy and training and empowering staff members that we can get a report from parking, we can get a report from student life or your activities, student organizations area, to your gym, to all these other places, right? They know how to do it, and then we're able to galvanize, right, different reports and different stuff that we have going on. So the biggest part in addressing micro misbehaviors that I have found is being able to inform the student of the prohibited behavior and the expectations moving forward. And that can come from different people, right? Sometimes the dean of students office or whoever handles student discipline on the different respective campuses, they can put their cape on and serve as a person that is having these educational conversations or doing these different types of things. Sometimes the academic colleges, they want to be able to handle these situations as close to in-house as they can, right, while including the appropriate people and then escalating if it needs to be outside of that particular area, but making sure that you have ample opportunities. Documentation is critical when it comes to this. If you're having a conversation with a student one-on-one, being able to have accurate notes. If you're conducting that conversation on Zoom, right, accurate records of the conversation that was had and reinforcing that expectation. So not just in that one-on-one capacity, but having that in writing, having that email, thanks for stopping by, John Doe. We had a great conversation. These are the things that we talked about as a reminder moving forward. I expect 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and having that record in notes, right, and or recording and in an email so that you can document that this conversation was had, this date, this time, and this is what was discussed. I think that's critical. We have to report incidents as they come. And what we have done a good job of advocating is to not wait. If there's a situation that you are able to report, as close to when you are able to report it, please report it, right? Like I just talked about the example of a student that we got reports across a 6-hour span. If we did not get those reports or people waited to the end of the day, the next day, right, we would not be able to have moved as quickly as we could have and being able to address behavior, have conversations with all of the relevant individuals and departments to be able to address these different behaviors. I already spoke to interim measures and how that works. I think it's important to have those in place. If you do not have a relationship with your general counsel, your legal counsel, I advocate that you create one or embolden the relationship that you currently have so that you have that already in place to be able to address those different things. And then knowing your referral to the student conduct office for repeated behavior that's in the same course or across a semester, when the behavior is escalating and becoming a complete disruption to the class, to the department, right? And specifically any threatening or violent behavior, where we can interact some interim measures, right? Or it's very clear this is a policy violation. We want to be able to intervene in the ways that we need to address the behavior so that everybody can have a safe environment for their learning on the respective campuses. And I will echo again, documentation is absolutely essential when we get into addressing micro misbehaviors. And I want to point out, this is what we have done, right, across my career and at my current campus in addressing micro misbehaviors, and it has been wildly successful. This is not a one size fits all, right? You have to know your audience as far as your students, your campus community, and kind of build those relationships to address these micro misbehaviors. I have seen the earlier that you catch a micro misbehavior and address it in a way that is firm so that students know what the expectation is, but it's also compassionate and wanting to be understanding and be an advocate for the holistic experience that they have. I feel like that helps. Sometimes we are unable to address the micro misbehavior in a way that is meaningful to the student when it escalates beyond a point to where the dean of students or the conduct officers are going to just handle the situation. And that's unfortunate, but we have seen a lot of success with addressing it early and consistently. So some of the gaps that were identified in addressing misbehaviors on our particular campus and across my career is that you try to eliminate the inconsistent response to student behavior. And that comes with doing training, getting in people's spaces and places, letting them know how to do things, empower them with tools that they can utilize to be able to address the different things that are happening. There's inconsistent enforcement of the institutional policies. Somebody's interpretation may be very different from another person's interpretation. And if you have this academic college's handbook is different from this academic college's handbook, you can imagine how there can be some confusion on how we enforce the different things. So having that alignment, I think, is really critical. There is sometimes a lack of communication when it comes to dealing with the different behaviors that exhibit across the campus community. We have worked really hard to address those different communication gaps and be an advocate and a resource for any of our campus community members to come and speak to us. There's a hesitation about what to address or when to escalate. Again, I think that can be really mitigated through training and getting in the spaces and places for people. Administrative change. We have found once you have done the work to inform different people about what's happening, what's going on, right? And there's personnel changes, policy changes, right? The facilitation of a policy and or process is changed because it reports to a new structure or whatever those different cases. That is a gap in how we address the different behaviors. And it's, as much as you can get back into alignment, get back into communicating and building relationships, I think that helps. And then the last thing is sometimes this process in dealing with a micro misbehavior, it becomes burdensome, right? Time, your mentality, you're emotionally invested, right? Or emotionally impacted by the situation, and you aren't always able to be objective. And it kind of consumes you, right? And so as much as you are able to mitigate those different things, separate those different things, provide training for, I think that that's important. And then the last thing that I wanted to offer up were the lessons that we learned. As I alluded to earlier, some incidents will not have a favorable resolution. Sometimes behavior will escalate to a point where sometimes the best lesson for that student is a separation from the institution or a break of some kind in some way so that they can level set, reset, right? The campus community can be safe and they're able to learn outside of that specific campus environment. We have to push, revise, and revamp the different policies and processes that we have. If you do not have a protocol and process, get with the team, talk with your supervisor. What can we do to have these different protocols in place for addressing this type of misbehavior in small, medium, and large? One thing that we have learned and have done a really good job of understanding what needs to know means for particular incidents in our campus regarding FERPA. We are more often than not willing to examine, does this fit within the needs to know designation and communicating the different information. If a faculty member is dealing with a particular student in their class, right, that is needs to know information because they could be potentially impacted by that behavior, as well as giving us situations. But having that conversation on who needs to know, giving that information. And again, I'll circle back to having a relationship with your legal counsel or OGC, however that looks, and being able to examine scenario based on the different situations that y'all may have experienced on your campus. Who needs to know and how do we inform them and what that can look like so that we can triage the situation. Failure to comply has been a consistent starting point for our student conduct process. When you have made it clear to address it, you've had that conversation, they know what the expectations are on an email, and they continue to exhibit that behavior, right? Or we see that across the different courses that they may be in or different departments, that becomes a failure to comply violation that the Dean of Students Office can absolutely, or whoever handles your discipline, can handle and run the rest of the way for that failure to comply. Please develop disruption protocols. Documentation will absolutely save your life. And protect yourself as often as you can. Document everything, right? As much as you can. Have that paper trail and communicate early and often. That is probably one of the biggest contributors to us being able to address micro misbehaviors. And so with that, I want to, that concludes my presentation. I wanted to offer up any questions that anybody in Zoom land wanted to offer up. So I'll stop sharing my screen. I see one question in the chat. What is one piece of advice you wish old supervisors would have given you? Um, I genuinely think more training in addressing these micro misbehaviors and then taking those tools that are learned and broadcasting them broadly across all the different campus community members. I am always shocked to see how many people don't know something that we have taken so much time to put on the website, to go here, to go there. We bought this poster to go here and there, got this QR code, and people just don't know. And so I think having those tools to be able to address those behaviors in a lot of spaces, just to add on to that, there are a lot of gray components, right? Alcohol, easy. Drugs, easy. Fighting, easy. Very clear violations. We can do interim measures here, no contact, all these different stuff there. But when it comes to these types of things that are in that gray, right, or it's that small level of behavior that's annoying, but not, no real clear violation, I think being able to address those specific things, no matter where you are, housing, in the academic environment, all those different things, I think that is critical. I think I answered your question in a little more. Any other questions? That's a good question. So the question is, how do you help students learn from the mistakes of others while respecting privacy? I think um, having different scenario-based opportunities for them to learn, especially in presentations. When we are dealing with and having presentations in front of our freshmen that are incoming for orientation, or transfer students that are incoming as a part of transfer orientation, or our student leaders and Greek leaders as a part of their orientations for their experiences, being able to have those true lived examples and offer them up as scenarios to be able to address all the different points. And so that can happen inside of your student organization. This can happen as a part of this particular experience, informing them how to report, right? If you're needing guidance, these are the different people that you can speak to, right? If you're concerned about a situation or a student's mental health, right? How it's impacting you, the classroom environment, your organization, what have you, right? What are the resources that are on campus to be able to address some of those needs, right? And so just better informing them every opportunity that I can get in front of students, to let them know what my role is, how my office functions, the different resources that I'm available. I want to be able to do that. I see some other questions. What is one gap? What is one gap in student conduct as a field you feel can be easily addressed? I think awareness of prohibited behavior. I think that as much as we can broadcast the different behaviors across orientation, across handbooks, across social media, across having videos and different stuff, I think if we are making it widely accessible for students to know what prohibited behavior is and the different consequences, I think that'll mitigate a lot of things. That's one gap that I think can be easily addressed. All it takes is getting a lot of stuff done on the front end, right? Recording that video, getting that QR code together, creating that graphic, and I think it can be worthwhile. Another question: how can other departments on campus support your efforts more effectively? I think co-presentations, right, to the different leaders or the different community members. I think being able to galvanize every opportunity that we have as far as resource fairs. Resource fairs happen all the time, right? I know 2 or 3 happen monthly across all of our different campuses. So I think every opportunity to be able to be present and give different situations and provide a perspective, I think is important. I think making other departments aware how to report, giving them the tools to be able to address behavior where it's relevant, um, knowing when to escalate from not only reporting, but I need to reach out to the student discipline office to address this particular situation, or just getting informed of how that process works and what it looks like. I think there's multiple ways to be able to do that. And I see Neil's message, Cranston. Couldn't stop singing at the top of his lungs at 1 a.m. I don't know if that's in reference to me. I don't know. I don't know who that person is. And I see one more question. What is one thing someone viewing this presentation can do today to begin changing the way their office addresses these types of behavior? I would say creating a protocol to address um, disruptive behavior. And that protocol can be broadly shared, or and it can look different ways, right? It can be on a website, it can be a pictographic, right? I think creating some level of protocol for disruption, right? I think that is a critical thing that people can put together. It doesn't have to be done solo. If you are able to build community or a committee, advisory or otherwise, to be able to address that and get that together and make it broadly shared, that is one massive way that we can address that type of behavior. So I see a couple questions come in. I'm trying to read them. Overcoming the fear that students have or anxiety that may be keeping them from opening up the email or returning the call. I think that's a misconception that I think we would just have to continue to work through. I think getting that letter from the dean of students office, right? We get often for different types of violation students. First question they ask when they get a meeting, am I being suspended? Am I being expelled? And, I think unbeknownst to them, this is a vape charge. This is not, we're not at suspension. This is a vape charge. And so, but I think the way that we present to students, I know at UHD, the Dean of Students Office is more than just the punitive hammer, right? We have a lot of programming that is outside of student discipline. Now, student discipline is our big bag, right? This is what we know for, this is what we do. But we have operations that are outside of that, that kind of show that advocacy and that student engagement piece. I think as many conversations as you can have with students to explain how processes work, right? We're not even at a part in the process for you to even have a sanction for something, right? First, let me tell you how the process works, right? In a general perspective, not even if you've already gotten some type of letter or summons, but in a general perspective, you are here because of this particular behavior. And so being able to explain how that works in a way that we have to be firm and accountable, but we can also be compassionate too, and understanding that there is grace and there is the ability for you to have redemption as a part of this process. And then the last question that I see, what do you recommend to help with that? Did I kind of answer that already? Or how did I? Okay.
But
Um,
I want to make sure you give yourself enough credit, because I think one thing you've always done really well, and that I learned from you, is to be very clear about you're not the law. You're married to the process, and your job is to help the student through it. And,
mhm.
reminding them there's not a prosecutor here. And so I want to make sure like people hear that part of your story, because you've always done that well.
Absolutely. That is critically important, right? I know a lot of times people may see me in my role here at UHD as the figurative hammer, the face of the face of punishment, if you will. And I explain when I meet with students whether it's just educational conversation or you're going through the conduct process, this is meant to be educational as well as holding you accountable, right? The process works the way that it works, and you're going to be well informed. You're going to be notified. You're going to have due process. You are a person in this process, right? There are opportunities and pathways for you to have redemption in this process as you go through it, right? And we are all about helping to triage and support as part of going through a process. And I think it looks different depending upon what's happening, right? When there are alleged violations of sexual misconduct, right? Fighting, we found 20 pounds of drugs in your room. Like, that is a very different conversation. It's still compassionate, right? It's still inclusive of the person themselves, and it's always respectful. But I think it's important to know that with whatever situation is coming in, the implications are very different as a part of that. And I think I always try to do a good job of seeing the humanity and letting students to see the transparency of the humanity in our process. This is not a got you campaign. We are not out to get you, right? This may be a bad expression, but I tell students all the time, we are not going to hit you without showing our hand, right? Every single piece of information that we have, you will experience, you will have a meaningful way to represent yourself, right? We want the best for you. We want you to get in that classroom, get those grades. We want you to get involved on campus in any way that you can. We want for this student experience to be enriching and transformative. How you come in should be very different than how you go out. You should have all the tools, experiences, right, and lessons, right, as a part of that experience. And I that's a great quote. If you knew what you were doing, I would not. Student conduct is recession proof because people are going to misbehave since the beginning of time. And so, thank you so much. Let me say, any other questions that anybody has? I want to be very cognizant of time. If there aren't any others, thank you. Thank you, Neil. I appreciate that. I am humbled and honored that the CUSPA has asked me to present and be a part of webinar Wednesdays. I hope that this has been a insightful and a transformative experience for anybody that listens or will listen in the future. And so I want to offer back up to Dr. Billups.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris. If you have a contact slide in your deck, would you put that up while I do the closing? Thank you so much for joining us today. We want to know your thoughts. Please complete our feedback survey. The link is provided in the chat. If you're watching this as a recording, the link will be in the description. Our next webinar Wednesday will be on next Wednesday, February 25th at noon. In this webinar, our Director of Education will join a 2025 Thomas Mormon Fellow and one of our fellowship mentors for a discussion of TCUSPA's fellowship program. Please invite a colleague, especially a current graduate student, to join us. Finally, the TCUSPA membership year runs from January to December. If you're not yet a member of TCUSPA, we encourage you to join us. Thank you and have a great day.